No further development has come to light following the finding of a baby apparently abandoned wrapped in brown paper in Ballure Glen on Sunday afternoon. The discovery was made by some children who were playing in the glen on Sunday morning, and a dog which they had with them was seen trying to retrieve a brown paper parcel which had been placed in bracken. They noticed a movement in the parcel and left the glen, but returned in the afternoon with an older boy to investigate further. They untied the parcel and found a live female child. The child, which was unclothed, was taken to Ramsey police station, whence it was transferred to the cottage hospital and placed in the matron's care and given medical attention. The child was 7.5 pounds in weight and, in the opinion of the doctors who made an examination, had been born about 6 days previously. They estimated it had been in the glen about 12 hours. The spot where it was found was almost directly under the Manx Electric Railway Bridge. The baby was cold when found, but revived after being given attention at the hospital. The police have been making inquiries, but have not so far been able to unravel the mystery.
That's an excerpt of a newspaper report from the 18th of April 1946, and it's where Mary Ramsey's life began. I'm Amy Griffiths, and on this episode of Island Life, I'm going to be finding out what exactly happened to the bonny baby found in the glen. In fact, it's where I am now. Just outside of Ramsey, Ballure Glen is tucked away beneath the Manx Electric Railway line. Today, it's a cold, wintry day in January. So cold, actually, that I got a little warning in my car when the outside temperature is 3 degrees or below when I was driving over the mountain. The wind's blowing and the wet ground is squelching beneath my boots, but the blue sky, clear to see through the leafless trees, is stretching out above me. I know the sea is near because I can smell it in the air, but for now it's hidden from my view as I walk along the path, sheltered by the trees and the land. The glen would have looked a bit different in the April of 1946 though. Spring would have been springing up with fresh leaves on the trees, probably some daffodils and primroses scattered around the path, and the bracken thickening. It was in this section of bracken here, almost directly under the MER bridge, that Mary was found, naked and tied in brown parcel paper. A group of children had been playing nearby when their dog found the parcel, unknowingly saving Mary's life that day. The last most people on the Isle of Man heard about Mary Ramsey was this newspaper article published in the Ramsey Courier on the 14th of June 1946.
The drama of Ballure Glen, enacted in the quiet hours of darkness or perhaps dim light of early dawn, which, but for the alertness of a group of boys on a Sunday afternoon walk, might have had a terrible ending, had a happy sequel in the Ramsey courthouse. Nestling snugly in a carry-cot, the baby girl found abandoned in Ballure Glen on April 14th and later registered in the name of Mary Ramsey, was carried into Ramsey Magistrates Court on Saturday to be legally handed over to foster parents. So that the future of the little girl may be safeguarded in every way, and it will not be possible for gossip mongers to point and say, "You were the little girl who was found in the glen," every precaution was taken to shield the identity of the foster parents, a young couple of comfortable means. The Magistrates' Court on Saturday was unique. None of the court officials can remember a similar case for decision, and it probably made legal history on the island. Mary is a bonny baby, and everything possible has been done to secure her future after such an unfortunate start.
Ooh, that's better. Back in the warmth of our snug little studio up on Douglas Head. So Mary moved away and lived the vast majority of her life not knowing how it started. Her name was changed, becoming Stephanie French, and she grew up in the south of England. She became Stephanie Taylor after marrying her husband, and they lived in Brighton with their only child, a daughter called Lorraine. Lorraine's been telling me more about Stephanie's life.
We actually didn't find out until my mum was 57, although she always felt like she didn't belong in her own family. So my mum was a foster parent for mother-baby placements, and she needed a full passport, and she only ever had a bridging part to her birth certificate. So she requested her full birth certificate, and they actually said to her, "We don't have a baby born on this date. Have you tried adoptions?" So she went to see my nan, and the story then came out.
Wow, and being 57 years old and finding that out for the first time. So her adopted parents had never told her the story?
No, they'd never told her. Never said a word.
Gosh, and how did your mum react when she'd had this conversation with her nan and had found out all of this history and this story of hers?
She was very shocked, but I don't think she was too shocked because obviously she always had this feeling that something wasn't quite right within the family. And she contacted a lady, so this would have been 17 to 20 years ago. And I think they tried to reopen the story back into the paper and see if anybody came through with any memories. And I do recall a gentleman coming to visit my mum from the island. And I think, if my memory serves right, he was one of the children that found my mum.
Wow, how amazing. And for him as well, that must have been incredible to see your mum and see that she's had, a full life and lived a full life thanks to him and his part in finding her. How incredible.
Absolutely, yeah.
For you then, finding that out as well, because I suppose that changes your family history as well. How did you take it?
Well, again, I think because of the relationship with my grandparents was not a fully fledged relationship, there was always a barrier with them. So again, I wasn't too shocked, I don't think.
I'm sure there's going to be lots of people listening who want to know the kind of life that your mum's had. And is she still with us?
No, she died in 2012.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
She died of cancer. She had a really good life, very privileged. Although there wasn't a lot of love, she had a very privileged upbringing. She was brought up by a solicitor and his wife. She went to a stage school. She appeared in several films like Summer Holiday with Cliff Richard and A Hard Day's Night with the Beatles.
Wow, some really big films.
Yeah, some really big films. And St. Trinian Bells was another one she was in. And then obviously she married my dad. They moved to Germany where I was born because he was military. And we ended up moving back to Brighton when my dad had left the army. And she lived a very nice life. And the thing that I really always find amazing is the line of work she went into, even though she didn't know her beginnings. And I know she's my mum, but she was the most wonderful, giving lady that you could meet, really. She was just a wonderful woman.
As Lorraine says, Stephanie went on to live a generally happy life before her untimely death in 2012. But I want to go back to 1946 and find out what the Isle of Man was like back then, what was happening at that point of history, what people's attitudes might have been, and how much impact an event like this would have had on the community. So I spoke to Matthew Richardson, who's the Curator of Art and Social History at Manx National Heritage.
Straighten up and fly right. Cool down, Papa, don't you blow your top.
It's the end of the Second World War. We've just come out of the most destructive and devastating war in history. So the Isle of Man was just getting back onto its feet after being used as an armed camp. The Isle of Man had a major airfield that was turned over to military use. It was being used for the training of naval recruits. It was being used for the training of army recruits. It had been used for the holding of military and civilian prisoners. So after all of this upheaval and military activity, it's just the very early stages of getting back to its usual role as a tourist destination.
And of course with that, presumably lots and lots of young men coming to the island who wouldn't usually be here as well.
Yeah, of course. So all of the many thousands of young men passing through the island here for a short space of time to do their military training before they're off to fight in different corners of the world.
And when it comes to having children outside of wedlock, was it something that was still frowned upon at that time?
When you look at society's attitudes to illegitimacy, you have to be aware that it's changed quite a lot over the course of, say, 200 years. If you go back to the Georgian era, 18th century, it wasn't so much of a big deal having children out of wedlock. Some people think as many as 10% were born out of wedlock. In our archives in the Manx Museum, we have the church court records where if a woman had a baby and wasn't married, she could affiliate, i.e. name the man who she thought was the father, or she said was the father, and the church would instruct him to pay for the child's upkeep. So this went on, it was quite a normal part of society. When you get to the Victorian period, attitudes change quite a lot. There's a reaction against what's seen as the licentiousness of the Georgian period, But also in England, you get the 1832 Poor Law, which puts the responsibility for looking after the poor more on the state. So ratepayers, they don't want to pay for poor people they see as licentious. So you get the idea of the deserving poor. So at the same time, you're getting the middle classes growing up. They want to differentiate themselves from the lower classes, and one way they do that is through what they see as their standards of behaviour. So you get the idea in that era, the Victorian era, of a fallen woman, you know, a woman who's had a baby out of wedlock. This is very shameful. By the time you get to the First World War, attitudes are changing completely again, because so many thousands of children are being born out of wedlock. And this is because, you know, life is not just cheap, it's throwaway. These young men, they may have a week's leave coming home to their family and friends before they're sent off to the front, and they might never come back again. And there are letters in the Times about this. People say that we shouldn't castigate these young women that are having children out of wedlock, because their fathers are the young men who are going off and fighting on the battlefields, dying for their country. So there's kind of a sea change in attitude to illegitimacy here. And then Second World War, similar thing happens again. Thousands of young men, you don't know if life's going to end tomorrow. Cities are being bombed. Young people have to live for the moment. So in both world wars, you get an erosion of these Victorian ideas of stigma of illegitimacy. It's just so widespread during the two world wars that it couldn't be anything else.
And so then if we go to the case of Mary Ramsey and a baby being abandoned in the Glen, when something like that happens, how did the community react at that time?
Well, I think that is not a common occurrence, not a common occurrence by any standard. I'm struggling to think of many examples of that happening in the Isle of Man. So that is a different aspect to this altogether. The fact of the pregnancy wouldn't perhaps raise many eyebrows, but certainly I think that perhaps did.
The mystery of the discovery of a newly born female child among the bracken in Ballure Glen near Ramsey remains unsolved in spite of widespread investigation. The little one, a girl, is thriving under the care of the matron and staff of the Ramsey Cottage Hospital and has been registered in the name of Mary Ramsey. It's hoped that if the mother does not come forward, that some offer of a good home may be made so that the child who has had such a bad start in life may continue her journey through life in good surroundings.
I'm Amy Griffiths, and on this episode of Island Life, I'm finding out what exactly happened to the bonny baby found in Ballure Glen nearly 80 years ago. As Matthew says, attitudes towards babies being born out of wedlock were changing because they had to, but it doesn't help to answer the question of why Stephanie was left in that glen all those years ago. But that's not a question that Lorraine is seeking an answer to. All she wants to do is find out more about her biological family. It's something she's been able to do with the help of a chance encounter. John French researches family trees and has helped numerous people track down their long-lost relatives using DNA. But it just so happens that he himself is a distant relation of Lorraine's.
Very distant cousin. She's half second cousin half first cousin twice removed.
Oh wow, gosh. That's impressive.
So my grandfather was her 2 times great grandfather, but through different wives.
Gosh, okay. It's a complicated link. To be honest, it's a very Manx link, so that's quite fitting.
Lorraine popped up on my list of DNA matches on the Ancestry website only back in August, so I was straight on that because it's not often you get a new close match. And we got in touch, and a few conversations later, Lorraine's shared her own DNA test to me so I can look at it and try and see where we go with it. And she's very fortunate in that in her list of DNA matches are 2 very good ones who are clearly maternal, i.e. they're not paternal matches, so they're certainly not related to me. And not only that, there's one of these 2 very good matches is from each side of Stephanie, her mother's family. So we've got an immediate lead to Stephanie's birth parents.
Wow,
Now,
after all this time.
well, it's not quite as easy as that. The starting point is here's two people who are on each side of the fence, maternal and paternal, as related to Stephanie. But then you've got to build it back to find out who these people actually are. Now, one of the two people had a tree with a few names in it, and that was great. And the other one didn't. Not so great. But one of the features in Ancestry is you can have a look at a DNA test match of your own and see who else you and that person share DNA with. So I looked at matches, on both sides and quickly developed two lots of possible parents. And this isn't very long ago, you see. Lorraine's mum was born in 1946. So we're only going back a generation or two, which is remarkably fortunate. So you've got some very good public records. So where we've got to at the moment is two families. And I could say with reasonable certainty that Stephanie's father is a member of family A and her mother is a member of family B. Where you go from there is a bit more difficult. We've got a fair idea of which people within that family it is, because Lorraine's spoken to one of the DNA matches in particular, who's given some quite good information that points at one particular person. So this is on Stephanie's mother's side, and it's quite likely one of two women who would have been quite young at the time. On the other side, it's not quite so clear-cut. Again, if I had to put money on it, I'd know who I'd put money on, but it's a family with about 5 boys in it. So in theory, it could be any one of 5 or maybe even 6, I think it is, brothers who were responsible, as it were. And then you've got to start placing these people in the right place at the right time. Well, on the mother's side, there's a lot of evidence to point at that person being on the Isle of Man at the end of the war. On the other side, on the father's side, not so easy. It's one of those situations where you need somebody who knows or who had a very strong suspicion that's not going to be written down anywhere. It's just in somebody's memory. I've actually done several of these. Well, not quite as dramatic as this one, I hasten to add. Tracing birth fathers for ladies who were adopted at birth. And this is as far as we've got before, is to one of a number of brothers. But everything else is right. The suspected father's family is not of the Isle of Man. It's a Liverpool family. And in fact, the mother's side also has connections to Liverpool, which, being as Liverpool was, where you went if you were going to the Isle of Man, you went from Liverpool. So I think the father could well have been in the Merchant Navy and somehow ended up on the Isle of Man, either because his ship docked there as part of a voyage, or he was discharged from his last service and just went over there for a holiday. I've not yet found any tangible name link between the two families, but that's my feeling, that if it's the person I'm looking at on the screen now, he was a merchant seaman and he served on troop ships, which obviously towards the end of the war weren't really needed anymore. So that's my feeling. That's the sort of background we're looking at.
And that's for the father's side. And have you got any clues for the mother's side?
It's a common name on the island. It's a very recognisable Isle of Man surname. And we do think there is somebody alive who was around at the time who might be listening or who will get to hear about this, possibly.
So John and Lorraine think they have a fairly good idea of who they think Stephanie's real parents were. Her dad was quite probably a Merchant Navy officer from Liverpool, while her mum was likely from Ramsey. Lorraine now thinks she's gone as far as she can using just DNA to trace her heritage. As John mentioned, they think they've established what her parents' surnames would have been, and the mum's in particular is a very recognisably Manx name. Lorraine's now hoping that by sharing those names, she may be able to track down a living relative.
Just generally, I think we've come to a crossroads in our research. There are two names that we have through DNA, and one of the trails goes really cold on one of the ladies. And I do believe that without kind of memories, if anyone still has any, we probably wouldn't get any further. I know through DNA now that it's the Corlett family, and her grandfather would have been Ambrose Corlett.
Wow, so you can be that specific with it.
You can with the DNA now, yeah. Obviously, I put my DNA in and up came a lot of results. There's two ladies, and my mum's grandmother, if you like, died in childbirth. And I know that that daughter went to live with her grandparents, so the trail just goes so cold. But the other lady we do know of, she was on the island, but it's that 50-50, isn't it? It could be. So without memories, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. So I've been told the family came from, I think the road was called Queen Street. I think it changed to Queen's Drive, or it was Queen's Drive and now Queen Street.
And Ramsey, is it?
I believe. And actually, when we had a look on the maps, it kind of falls into place because in a car, it is literally a minute's drive to where my mum was found, I believe.
What are you hoping that people will be able to help you with? So are you hoping to find somebody who knew of the family and may have some clues that they can give you?
Yeah, because I think there's still family maybe on the island still that may still hold some memories, or it may jog their memory of an event that may have happened in their past.
So that would be your mum's mum. I suppose, do you have any more information about your mum's dad that you want to share at this stage?
We haven't really ventured down that line. I think we have it to a family, but they're a very big Liverpudlian family. So kind of our research we haven't got that far yet with the research, but we do have a family name of Palmer.
Okay, so wow, so you've got two surnames to work with there. And I understand that you don't want to force this on anybody. You don't want to try and make anybody uncomfortable in any way, that you're just trying to find out information. But what would it mean to you to be able to find out a little bit more about your biological family?
Just for us, it fills in an absolute void because I don't have any family history on my mum's side. It stops at my mum, and it would just be nice. It just would be nice to know her history, and if I have any family on the Isle of Man still.
If these details are familiar to you in any way, Lorraine really wants to hear from you. She does, though, completely understand that this is a delicate subject.
I'm just very aware of how this could impact some families, immediate families on the Isle of Man. For me, because I had a family and I grew up and I didn't know any different, it's a bit easier, but I wouldn't want to affect anybody and the way they felt about their kind of ancestors.
And there's that balance, isn't there, between wanting to get some answers for yourself, but also trying to do right by all of the parties involved, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I'm actually an only child, so my maternal side of the family has ended. Although, obviously, with the research, I know there are possibly several of my relatives that are still living on the island.
If you know anything and you would like to get in touch with Lorraine, you can contact us at Manx Radio and we'll put you in touch. In the meantime, though, Lorraine's planning her first visit to the island later this year, so she can see some of the places that might have been significant to her biological family. And she's agreed to let me go with her, so this won't be the last that we hear of this story.
Up until this year, I mean, the only place I had to go was to go and visit the Glen, and then that would have been my lot. But I do have other places now there's graves that I can go and see. There's possibly a house that I could go and see. So we are planning next year to come to the island.
we may never know the truth about Mary Ramsey's start in life, who her parents were, if her biological father even knew she existed, and ultimately why she was abandoned. But it's safe to say, given that we're still talking about it today, the shockwaves of this story went far and wide, and that people still remember and care about the welfare of Mary Ramsey. I'm Amy Griffiths, and thank you for listening to this special episode of Island Life. You can listen back to this programme at manxradio.com or by subscribing to Manx Radio podcasts using your usual podcast provider.